we remain committed to a foreign relations policy and outlook that prioritizes the achievement of the African Union's Agenda 2063. Honorable Malema, South Africa's role on the continent and across the world remains firmly on our agenda. We don't just talk about it, we do, we act it out as the Republic of South Africa. We see the African Continental Free Trade Area and other instruments of continental economic integration as vital to our own economic fortunes. In January this year, we saw our first shipment of products to other African countries under the African Continental Free Trade Area. We are extremely encouraged by the potential of the trade area and what it presents in terms of new markets for South African goods, products, and services. We welcome the progress that is being made towards finalizing rules of origin of products and towards a pan-African payment and settlement system. As Minister Tau said, the African Continental Free Trade Area is a game-changing initiative to leverage one of the fastest growing consumer markets in the world, Africa. A growing market that is young, that is tech-savvy, highly educated, and conscientious about implementing actionable Pan-Africanism and for the 21st century. As South Africa, we are committed to silencing the guns on the continent and playing our part in peacekeeping and peace-building efforts on our continent. And we do this not because we are adventurists. We do this at the behest of the United Nations, the African Union, and our own Southern African Development Community, SADC. We have deployed members of the South African National Defense Force to support the UN, the AU, and SADC peacekeeping missions in several parts of our continent. They have served not only their own country, but also their continent with diligence and courage. We once again pay tribute to the soldiers who have lost their lives during operations in the DRC and in Mozambique, but also in our own country, as some have unfortunately lost their lives either through fires or various mishaps. And we do pass our condolences to the families of our soldiers, and we salute their bravery and sacrifice in the cause of peace in one of the world's most troubled regions. But we also pay our condolences to the families of our police officers who also die in operations and whose families lose breadwinners and their loved ones. So we dip our heads to them as well. We continue to make every effort to ensure the safety and well-being of our troops, of our police, in all the various operations that they get involved in. Our principled solidarity with the peoples burdened under the yoke of oppression and subjugation will not waver. We stand in solidarity with the peoples of Western Sahara and Palestine, and we continue to support Cuba as well. On Friday last week, as members of this House were debating, the International Court of Justice issued an advisory opinion on the state of Israel's continued occupation of Palestine and the construction of settlements in the West Bank, ruling that this was illegal under international law. The court said this should come to an end and as rapidly as possible. And we also reiterate that the occupation of Gaza and the West Bank must come to an end so that the Palestinians must have self-determination. Now, this is a separate case to the one launched by South Africa at the International Court of Justice last year in response to the genocide being perpetrated against the people of Gaza. What this latest ruling indicates is that international momentum against Israel's continued violations of the rights of the Palestinian people is growing. Just as I finish addressing you replying to this debate, I will be meeting the entire legal team that represents us at the International Court of Justice. These are some of the dedicated South African jurists, legal eagles I call them, who have through their intellectual prowess and legal knowledge been able to lift our flag to the topmost part of the international justice system. And I am going to be thanking them on your behalf. Just as our struggle for national liberation was eventually won with steady victories, so too will the quest for Palestine statehood be ultimately realized. We will continue to pursue progressive internationalism and advance principled solidarity. Our own history and experience demands no less of us. On global platforms, we will continue to push for the reform of the institutions of global governance, including the reform of the United Nations Security Council, so that they are better able to reflect and to represent those areas of the world that do not have a voice, particularly our own beloved continent. We will continue to push for the international financial institutions and the multilateral development banks to be reformed and representative, and to provide greater financial and technical support to developing countries to meet their most pressing needs. South Africa is preparing to host the annual G20 summit in 2025. We are pleased that our campaign to include the African Union as a member of the G20 was successful. You might recall we were the only African country that has been part of the G20. We now have our entire continent represented in that most important body. So South Africa and the AU will be acting together to advance the interests of our continent. This is an important platform to advance the interests of our continent and other countries of the global south, and to mobilize support for a more just and equal world order. Last year, South Africa played an instrumental role in the expansion of BRICS. This represents favorable trade and investment opportunities for our country, which we will continue to pursue in the course of the 7th administration. And we will continue to urge more developed economy countries to meet their responsibilities and obligations to developing economies to provide support for climate change adaptation and mitigation in line with their commitments under the Paris Agreement. As the Government of National Unity, we will continuously pursue a foreign policy based on the national interests, our country's economic objectives, and in furtherance of human rights and fundamental freedoms for all. In the same speech at the meeting of the OAU in 1994, Madiba concluded thus: if freedom was the crown which the fighters of liberation sought to place on the head of Mother Africa, let the upliftment, the happiness, the prosperity and comfort of her children be the jewel of the crown.